Coming up, Kyrie Irving returns to Brooklyn and along with Luka Doncic lights the Brooklyn Nets on fire, burning them down 119-107. We break down the loss, the terrible game plan, and ultimately how this team proceeds towards the deadline. All coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, this feels eerily familiar to rinse and repeat in terms of a lazy effort from the Brooklyn Nets to start this game, an awful game plan, and really just no opportunity as Ben Simmons played tonight to have a little bit of fun juice, at least for, 60 seconds.
Yeah, got a little juice with Ben Simmons in the starting lineup. That's still down pretty bad here with some of the injuries that they suffered in the long term. Old friend Kyrie Irving back in the building. No tribute video, I should say. They just welcomed back Kyrie Irving, Markieff Morris, and Seth Curry with a little thanks for being around for a little while, and let's go play the game.
Surprised they gave a tribute to Seth Curry, but not to Kyrie. It was an interesting choice.
So, but you're right. The way the game started, the Nets just really lacked any juice. They had multiple times to kind of get back in the game late. They did sort of turn it on in the second half a little bit more to pull themselves back into the game. And we could talk about that, what swung the tide. But yeah, just to start this game, it seemed to be a very loose / no game plan of how to deal with the Kyrie and Luka tandem. And it really just showed, and it kind of came out in different versions of confusion, sort of like low effort. And when you combine those two things together, it just is going to look bad. And really for a major part of this game, it did look really bad. They were able to turn it around a little bit in the second half. So I don't want to just totally ignore that, but they just had dug themselves such a hole against a team like this and two sort of generational offensive talents, which the Dallas Mavericks have. You're just not going to be, it's going to be really hard to come back against a team like this, right? Because they can just dial it in and they can dagger you. And that's basically what they ended up doing late. And it was mostly born out of what sort of started early.
Yeah, combined for 71 points to Kyrie Irving and Luka. They go a combined 10 of 21 from beyond the arc. And you mentioned it there. The effort piece is what bothers me here. Yes, the Nets are shorthanded, right? They're missing a lot of guys. His first game back for Kyrie, I think, in 6 games for Dallas as well, dealing with a thumb injury. But the frustrating part is, on paper, with the injuries the Nets currently have, you don't expect to necessarily win this game. But in the third quarter, when the Brooklyn Nets go on a 12-2 run and get it down to single digits, you think, hey, all right, there is a little bit of juice here. But then they get absolutely blitzed by Luka, daggers, threes from all over the court, and it blows back up to a near 20-point lead going to the fourth. They do it again. They fight back. To watch the third and fourth quarters of this game, that's all you needed. 4 quarters of that, and I would have lived with the results. It could have been the exact same 119-107 final score, but if you played the way you did midway through the third, let's say, and then into the fourth quarter, I can live with the results because we understand you are shorthanded. They tried Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton on the court together. We can discuss when that did not work, but ultimately, it does come down to game plan and effort. And it just didn't seem like the Brooklyn Nets, Jacques Vaughn, the coaching staff, the players were terribly interested in this for the first 24 minutes.
Yeah, early on in the game, they tried to start throwing some doubles and blitzes at Luka, and
just lazy, slow blitzes.
So very slow. It was almost like it was hard to tell if it was a bad communication or just laziness. Because sometimes there is communication issues, right? Like whether you're going to bring everyone up to the level of the screen and kind of go after the blitz. And there were times where it felt like the guys just weren't really sure if they should be or not. And that can look like laziness or it can look like confusion. Because if you're half in and half out, you might not know, oh, should I be doing this now or not?
Right.
Regardless, it doesn't matter. The result was the same. Whereas that Luka, who's seen this a million times in his career, when you throw these doubles at him, he just will make he doesn't spend too much time on it. He makes the first read, and now all of a sudden it's basically 4-on-3, right? For them. Kyrie cooked a couple of those matchups, not all. Some were times where he was taking it at Cam Thomas, who they really picked on defensively. Sometimes he was just kind of cooking in a way that, like, he pulled up over Jaylen Wilson for a heat check 3 at one point. So, like, there was a few different things going on, but it really did look like the Nets were unaware that they were playing Luka and these guys, like, going into the game.
That's the best way to encapsulate it. Right.
And I think that, like, that was the troubling sign, was that early. And again, by the way, like, later on, they did make adjustments that kind of did work ish, but early on it looked like they just really had no plan at all. And if you're not gonna be fully committed to a trapping style against Luka, or be fully committed to, like, switch everything or whatever, and really like, he's just too good. He's the best. I mean, he's at worst the second best offensive player in basketball, like, depending on where you want to put Jokic, right? So, like, it's just, you just can't be half in on a guy like him. And when you put Kyrie next to him, like, you're really going to be just in so much trouble. These guys are superstar talents on the offensive end. You can't not have a very set plan and have everyone 100% aware of what you're going to do. Because if that's going to happen, you're going to see what we got in this first half, where they were outscored 65-47, right? And the game at that point basically felt over. And if you're just going to allow that to happen, you're not going to be able to beat these teams. They're just too good.
By the way, 18 rebounds, 17 of them defensive for Luka Doncic in this one, to go along with his 9 assists as well. And you mentioned it there, right? You can make decisions about how you want to defend Luka, how you want to defend Kyrie. I know we'll talk about some other sequences here, but I will just say in this moment, you see in the second half when they start to put Claxton in ISO defending against Luka, right?
Yeah.
Now, is he always going to win that matchup? No, but you saw him win several possessions of it, and it looked starkly better than what they had going on in the first half. And I think if you're going to start this game with Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton on the floor together, then that's the choice you have to make from the word go. You go defend him one-on-one. Ben Simmons helps with the rebounding and the around the basket stuff, right? You're going to have to sacrifice something here. We know how good Claxton is near the basket, but I think right now, with where their games are, you want Claxton taking that assignment away from the basket and live with the results. Instead, there were so many sequences where you end up with two, quote, bigger bodies in Simmons and Claxton sharing a lot of the same kind of space, and effectively giving plus assignments across the board for the Dallas offense, and a lot of easy looks for some of the role players around the basket as well.
And with that Claxton switch that they made, the adjustment that they made, where they just, like, sort of basically put a Claxton on Luka and said, but you got to remember, like, Dallas is going to adjust to that too. Like, they adjusted within 3 or 4 possessions to that. They just brought the screener really high, like basically right at half court. And then you make Claxton navigate screens really far away from the basket. And that's how you kind of undo that. So basically with Dallas, you have to throw lots of different looks at them. And one of the looks cannot be 50% jogging into a blitz, right? Like, that can't be that that's going to be it.
Soft jogs towards the perimeter. As
that's
Luka
just going to be it.
Yep.
If that's going to be it, like, I can already tell you what's going to happen, right? Like, and so again, like, these teams are always going to adjust. Like, it's not like you can just put Claxton on Luka Doncic starting at the tip and then go all 48 minutes with that. Like, there are ways around it, right? Like, just make them navigate screens, get them further away from the basket, right? Like, make a quick decision so that, like, put it in Kyrie's hands so he can blow by a defender that's really spaced. Like, there's lots of ways to navigate around that, but it just, like, took a little too long for them to get there. And they really didn't leverage the advantage they had by playing Simmons and Claxton together early to start the game. Like, that's what they have to leverage this. If you're going to give it away from the spacing on the other end, you have to leverage the defensive prowess and athleticism on the defensive end. And they just really didn't do it. So it ended up being kind of worse of both worlds.
Let's talk about here, coming up in 1 second, the very quiet 28-point performance from Mikal Bridges, another offensive struggle from Cam Thomas that came with 2 key silver linings, and the ways in which the Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton pairing did not work out. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy? It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. Leveled up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You always find exactly what you're looking for. It's got the eBay Guaranteed Fit, too. So your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need, the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends at Prize Picks. It's demon time on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money. Let me say that again. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons and green goblins get you different payouts, so you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. I was taking a look at some of these Prize Picks, demon and goblins. They got all kinds of different stuff happening for this Sunday, going, more or less on the receiving yards for Kelsey. You go more or less on the touchdowns for McCaffrey. That's a little bit what you're getting. And the payouts change too. So it's really fun to look at where these demons and goblins are showing up, because you're going to see some numbers that are really going to make your eyes pop out when you go to Prize Picks. But that's because Prize Picks is daily fantasy made super easy. They took all the best parts of daily fantasy, eliminated the hard parts like salary, sharks in the water, just going more or less on those Prize Picks projections, and they sliced and diced it so many different ways just for Sunday's game. I mean, it's like rush yards, receptions, rush plus receptions plus touchdowns, fantasy score, passing TDs, field goals made. That's just a sample of what you're getting over there at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we continue the post-game podcast, Brooklyn Nets fall at home 119-107 to the Dallas Mavericks. I'd like to say that the score is about where it was in terms of what happened here, but the Nets were down by 20 plus, maybe 30 at one point in this game, and tried to claw their way back into it. Now, the thing, I think we do when the Nets are a team that's well below 500, they have these struggles, they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now, is to look at some players here. I mentioned, I'll get to Bridges here in a second, but Cam Thomas has another difficult shooting night, 6 of 16, just 1 of 3 from deep, gets to the line 4 times. I will say, you could tell, I think that he feels like, and probably justifiably, he has done enough now already in his young career to be more deserving of some of these calls, some of the physical play. It feels like, guys of a certain level get those whistles, and he has not to this point. But I will just say, 8 rebounds in this game and 8 assists, career high in assists in this game. You have to look beyond the loss at this point and just talk about a young player developing. Only 16 points, but this is the thing we always point to. If you're going to have an off shooting night, you can still be on the court. You can still have value if you find ways to help other players be successful. Great example tonight for him of being able to do that.
Yeah, for a guy that we were never sure if he was going to be able to put together the passing piece, I mean, that's really coming around in a big way. He was on kind of triple-double watch here, right? 16, 8, and 8 in 37 minutes. And to even be thinking about that with him, I know he was minus 19. He got picked on all night on defense. Like, it was not another, sort of just bad shooting night for him, just really inefficient shooting night. Maybe there was some frustration there as well. I'm willing to take the positives just because of where we are in the Cam Thomas timeline, right? Like, we're just at a point now where little pieces of growth in his game are good things. It's not going to be there every single night. He's just not that guy yet. And just the nature of how he plays, there's going to be inefficiency in the shooting, just because he takes really difficult shots at times. He makes those difficult shots at a clip that most other players can't. But if you're going to take many difficult shots at volume, you're going to have these kinds of nights every once in a while. I think overall, maybe he shouldn't close this game. I mean, they were down, right? But it would have been a tough call, I think, late game here to think about whether or not he should have closed, because the defense was a real bad problem. In this one. This is a really tough matchup for him. 2 superstar guards and one of them's huge. He's really down bad in terms of being able to hang defensively. But again, I'm not even knocking him. I think that overall, the 8 assists, the rebounds or whatever, I think that's just kind of, I don't know if that's
byproduct.
Yeah, but if the assists, and these were purposeful too, they were good reads, he saw some doubles come early, he was able to get into the flow, get into the lane, and instead of trying to jack up sort of a head half swiveled around shot, finding open shooters when defense collapsed. I think that's just a massive sign of growth for him. So I think I'm willing to, even in a kind of a bad loss, look at this game as just another stepping stone for him to say, okay, he's got this in his bag. He's beginning to make the right reads. He's beginning, actually, it's funny. I was thinking about this when I saw him make one of the passes, he's not the same guy, but I remember thinking about this at Bruce Brown when Bruce Brown started making like the short roll passes,
The next
and you're like,
step,
oh, hold on. Okay, we got something here. I had like the same sort of like moment thinking about Cam when he just rolled into the lane. Again, I'm not comparing the type of passes at all. It's clearly totally different players. I'm just saying like the recognition that he was starting to see the game a little faster, because that's what the passes are. For him, he's seeing the game faster. And I think that's a really critical part of his growth.
Yeah, if you look at 6 of 16, as I mentioned here, a month ago, maybe even as little as a month ago, that's 23 shots from him, right? Maybe it's 8 of 23 on a night like this, and 4 assists or 3 assists or 2 assists, right? So again, you'd like it to be coming in a winning effort, but I think that balance of his game is what matters in his next step of his development. The other thing is, you mentioned, yeah, he's a minus 19 in this game. Guess what? The next worst player in that category is Mikal Bridges, who in 39 minutes, 11 to 21. This is, again, you look at the box score, 5 of 11 from deep, gives you 28 points. But to watch this game, especially early, I mean, this is also team wide, by the way. He went 1 for 3 from beyond the arc early in the game, but it was possession after possession of trying to find specific sets and getting him these open looks, and he just didn't seem. It is a back-to-back. Both teams were on it, but he just didn't seem to have the engagement, the drive. And even though the numbers look good by the end of it, it really was, if we're talking about who are your best players, right? He needs to take on that role, especially offensively, when you have no Cameron Johnson in this game, no Dorian Finney-Smith, right? You're missing a lot of key pieces here. And this is, I don't even want to knock him, but it's just another reminder. Like, he's not that guy where you could say, okay, go toe to toe with Kyrie Irving for a quarter and a half here, and let's see if we can get ourselves into this game. It's not going to be the way it is. He's going to get in his spots as it naturally comes in the flow of the game.
I think what's going to be a recurring theme for us, like, through the trade deadline and through the rest of the season and beyond, is that when the games are like this, right? When it's like you get 39 minutes from Bridges and 37 from Cam. And I think those minutes are really encouraging, especially for Cam Thomas here, right? But they're going to combine for 44 points. I could just basically tell you what's the score. I could basically tell you if the Nets won or lost, right? Like they rely on these guys a ton for the offense, especially when the starting lineup is, if you're going to put Simmons in the starting lineup, which I appreciated the effort by Vaughn to at least try that, right? Like, I think that was a fine move. But if they're not going to be able to score at like pretty heavy clips, there's just not enough scoring prowess in the rest of this lineup. Like, Dinwiddie doesn't really want to go to the rim or do anything anymore, really, with all that much frequency. Who even knows if he's going to be on the team much longer? Simmons isn't going to shoot. And Claxton, he's just, if he's getting lobs, then great, or little turnarounds to the basket, but like, he's not creating a lot of his offense. So basically what ends up happening is, if these guys are going to be like the significant volume of shooting, they just have to score a lot. And the nights where they're struggling, it's really such an uphill climb for this offense. And if they stick with the starting lineup, I don't think they will. Although it will be interesting to sort of see what they do when Cameron Johnson comes back, when Dorian Finney-Smith comes back, if he doesn't get traded. But I just think when we look at even just looking at the box score at the end of the night, forget about just like analyzing every single shot. Yeah. Looking at the box score every night, when you see these kinds of struggles with the efficiency, the Nets just don't have enough behind these guys. Lonnie Walker, you're going to get your Lonnie Walker games in here and there, but he didn't play tonight. So like, it's just going to be tough. And I think both these guys are like, well above average scorers, obviously, but the Nets just rely on them way more than like most other teams would in similar situations.
Right. The hierarchy would be very different on almost every other team if you had these two players.
If you went through every other NBA team and put these guys on that team, there'd be at least there'd be more juice. And honestly, that's like the most disappointing thing about the Dinwiddie season, right? Because like, really, you would think he would be like sort of like that guy, like, hey, we need to settle it down. Let's run some pick and roll. But they just don't do that anymore. Tonight really would have been the night to do it too. Like, against this sort of centerless Dallas team, like tonight would have been the night to do it. But they seem so uninterested in running that kind of scheme anymore.
Yeah, it seems like, again, as we said all season long, the pace of development and scheme building and figuring out how these pieces fit together always seems to be a half a step behind what feels like would be solid game plans on a night-to-night basis. Coming up here in a second, what did we learn coming off of this bench unit? Jacque Vaughn almost went with a bold strategy with some of the young players. And beyond Claxton and Simmons sharing the court together, there was another reminder of what can go wrong when Ben Simmons is on the floor. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, when it comes to buying tickets, the ticket buying experience should be fun. You're going out to have fun at the game, at the concert, at the comedy show, at the play, whatever it is, the musical, even. You're excited for what you want to go see. You do not want to get bogged down in a rough ticket buying experience. That's why Game Time has you covered. They have you not worrying about it. Get you there fast and easy with the tickets you want to get. Like I said, sports, music, comedy, theater events near you. They get killer last-minute deals. They got all-in prices, views from your seat, so you know what you're going to be seeing exactly when you sit down. Best price guarantee. If you head over to Game Time right now, they got a bunch of Nets stuff going on. Starting at $14, Cavs at Nets on Thursday the 8th. Okay. San Antonio at the Nets on the 10th on Saturday, starting at $41. Little Victor Wembanyama coming to town. Come on, stop it. On Tuesday, Celtics and Nets gets a little pricier there, $72. It's all there for you over on Game Time. Like I said, best deals right up to the last minute, right up to the start of the event. It's all there for you. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On, just like our podcast network, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as we tie a bow here on the Locked On Nets podcast, the 119-107 loss for the Brooklyn Nets at home to the returning Kyrie Irving. No tribute video provided on the front end of this one. We remind you to go over to wegotnets.com and sign up for the free ebook, 5 stories in 5 days, all about the Brooklyn Nets franchise, going all the way back to the Jersey days. Some great moments, some sad times. And guess what? That's what it is being a Nets fan. Wegotnets.com, free ebook. Sign up with your email and you will be alerted as we continue to roll out some great content over there as well. Now, we talk about coming into this game, all of the injuries. So you get the spark here with the idea that we're going to run with a little bit of a deeper roster here. You get Clowney. Clowney comes in here, and I'll be honest with you, maybe his development is a little bit further along than we initially thought when they drafted him. However, it only took a couple of sequences where he was getting bounced around like a ping pong ball in the paint at times to the point where he got bounced into Spencer Dinwiddie on an offensive set trying to go to the basket. So you weren't able to play much of him. I'm not going to say surprised. Are you disappointed that Trendon Watford stepped in for 3 minutes and got immediately taken off the court here? We know Dennis Smith Jr. is going to get his. Royce O'Neal, again, some late threes that helped make this game a little bit interesting in the third and fourth quarters. But you're depleted. You are short on your rotations. And Jacque Vaughn just doesn't choose to go with a little bit more size, a little bit more length to at least help out in the rebounds, at least mitigate some of the size disadvantage, especially when you have someone like Luka in that backcourt.
Buddy, Jaylen Wilson. Jaylen Wilson's looking over here.
I was saving that for my thing. I want to dump all these guys first and then get to Jaylen Wilson, the jewel of the Brooklyn Nets franchise.
Jaylen Wilson's shrugging his shoulders, be like, "Hey man, what did I have to do for Adam to notice me?"
You know what? Fine. Let's cut right to it, because I have been the advocate for him for so long, going back to the All-Star break, saying if you draft a guy of his age, you need to play him sooner rather than later. Yeah. And when you look at his line in 18 minutes, 3 of 7 from the field, 2 of 3 from deep, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal. Really, eye test tells you a lot. 10 points for him in this game. It's that he has an NBA body. He even stayed and ran with Kyrie Irving towards the basket defensively at times. He does more than enough.
Stripped him once.
Yes, pulled one away there and triggered a bit of a fast break for the Brooklyn Nets. He's shown enough. There's just no world here. And I've said this before, and this is a great illustration of it. There's no world where he has not at least inserted himself into I'm a part of the NBA level roster, that if you're looking for minutes, I should be the guy's number that you call more often than not.
Yeah, this is a really encouraging game from him. And I do wonder, as we talk about the trade deadline coming up here on the next episode and later on YouTube, if you're hanging around here, but that I wonder if games like this, not like make you confident, because he's been really playing pretty well in the G League, but like if you're like, okay, at some point we just need to start playing some of these guys, and based on his age, sort of his specs and everything, that he can just be, a Dorian Finney-Smith or, Royce O'Neal replacement. He's not going to be as good as those guys clearly right now. I think that's not really what I'm saying, but we would always know that. And right. At some point you just have to be willing and able to play some of these guys. It's been a little slow in the development with this coaching staff in terms of getting guys on the court, I think. But yeah, in terms of what you saw tonight, I mean, he looked very confident. Yep. He looked, and it's like one of those things too, like, as you said, Clowney, like he just looks filled out. right? And this is what happens when you get drafted after your 4 years of college, as opposed to, after your freshman year, right? The 3 or 4 year difference makes a big difference in just overall body type, muscular structure, like everything else. You're just more filled out. And Jaylen Wilson is already there. Not the most, fastest and twitchiest guy, but pretty smart, sort of understands where he's supposed to be on the court. Very tough minutes here against guys like Kyrie and Luka, where he had to pick up some of those assignments. Like, he's going against just veteran guys here. And if you just were dropped out of the sky tonight and you watch your first basketball game, you would not know that this guy had like barely played NBA minutes.
Right.
Like, and I think that's a good sign. That's a compliment, right? It's like he looked like he belonged on the court in a not easy matchup. And what I like about versions like this, and this is why I'm always a proponent for trying to play these young guys more. It's one thing when you get like the Milwaukee game and you're like, young guys get to play, roll the balls out in the court. We'll see what happens. Right. Like, here it's, hey, you one young guy, go play with all the guys that have been playing together and fit in. That's just such a different experience than we're tanking. Or not tanking, but like we're punting this game.
Night off for the real squad, B team, go in there.
Right, because no one's got any chemistry, whatever. But you get 4 guys that kind of have some chemistry together, then you can start gelling a little better. And I think the Nets really need to take opportunities to try to do this more. He looked like he belonged.
Yeah, nose for the ball as well, which we've seen from him in the G League, the Summer League, and the small sample size, offensively and defensive rebounds. You mentioned about kind of gets it, understands the angles, finds a way to use his body and get in there and be active. Obviously phenomenal. And we're going to talk about him more extensively, as Doug said, when we give our trade preview episode coming up on the feed and also later tonight. But let's just close out on this last note here. And it's not to take anything away from, if you go in and look, 20 minutes from Ben Simmons, that's encouraging. More minutes from him. He's at starting lineup. He was a +1 in this game tonight.
Yeah.
Also, 7 shots.
I think the game would have been different. I think the game would have been different if he wasn't on a minutes limit. Like, I think
So here's the fascinating thing about that, because maybe it would have, right? Because the defensive value, certainly, obviously the pace offensively, everything that he brings to that. But there was also, especially with Claxton, there was a couple of moments when they had a little 2-man game working on the offensive end for a little layup early on. And I was like, well, this is how we all drew this up, right? Just a 2-man non-shooter game. But even when Claxton was out and it was just Simmons, you keep getting this reminder. There are these moments when players are going into the paint and Simmons is anticipating for the rebound, trying to get positioning. If that shot doesn't go up, all of a sudden it is just bodies bumping around off of one another where they're not sure. The shooter isn't sure if, should I hand it to Ben Simmons? He's not usually inclined to go up with this. You give it to him. He's looking for someone on the outside. There's only 3 other players to throw to. So there was still this clunkiness, right? And when you don't have Johnson and Lonnie Walker and Dorian Finney-Smith, right? You need to have volume of shooters at all times so that there's always the outlet and so that Ben Simmons doesn't get caught in that bit of no man's land. So it's still just a reminder here. There is this clunky nature to it, but I do agree with you. Give me 25 minutes of Ben Simmons, 26 minutes of Ben Simmons tonight. Maybe this late game sequences go a little bit different for them.
Yeah, and like, I don't want to just like gild the lily here because he's barely played, and we just need to. I think they clearly need to take a very slow approach with him. 7 shots though, with a few like sort of nice finishes with power at the rim. That's a good sign, right? Yeah. I think he did put up a couple like sort of mid range, at least 2 little middies that both missed, but whatever. Like, I just like. You have to at least try them. And so
got to the line, right? 1 to 2. Hey, we'll take
7 shots in 20 minutes for a guy who's averaging way less than that on a per minute basis.
9, 7, and 9 triple-double watch for this guy in 20 minutes.
All right, so rough game. Still some positives to take from this team. Look, that's just, I think, where we're going to be with this Nets team, right? We're going to need to take the positive with the negatives. I think where they are, and we'll talk about this with the trade deadline, where they are as a team is on a night-to-night basis. I think there's going to be some nights that are rough, but if we can keep seeing growth from guys like Cam Thomas, keep Ben Simmons healthy, like, there are paths for this team to get better for sure. And there are going to be games where they put it all together too. All right, if you are in YouTube right now, stick around because Adam and I are going to roll through some trade deadline scenarios here leading into Wednesday and Thursday. If not, if you're on the podcast feed, you're going to get this as a separate podcast, but it's just a good reminder to make sure that you're tuned into what's happening on YouTube, because that's where you're going to get the live stuff happening after games. Visit WeGotNets.com, grab that free ebook as well.
I think it's a lack of hope that comes and gets you. See, I believe in hope. I believe in belief. That's Theodore Lasso.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow and in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah. Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets are moving towards the NBA trade deadline. Where does the value stand on players like Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Spencer Dinwiddie? And is this team ready, finally, to start to move towards some of the youth? We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. Every single day over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrook. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. And Doug, fresh off a loss, the Brooklyn Nets are pushing towards the deadline, and I think it's finally time to say, where do we stand? Is this team going to make moves, and have they ultimately made some missteps in when the highest value was there for key veterans like Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal?
Yeah, look, this has been the talking point for a while now with the Nets about sort of like how they would approach this trade deadline. We've heard lots of different rumors. We've heard lots of different just things being thrown out there. I think some is coming from the Nets front office as sort of like, I don't know, as a way to just either grease the wheels on some of these moves or just kind of evaluate what the overall market is going to be. I think, there's a lot. I would go on a player level. And just as a note too, we're recording this Tuesday night following the game, right? So because we're live on YouTube as we go through some of the stuff following the Dallas game. But as we head into the trade deadline, actually, let's start here with the first. Mikal Bridges. It seems like they've gotten offers. It seems like teams have said, they're willing to unload a significant amount of draft capital. Do you think there's any chance that Bridges is dealt before the deadline? This is the big one.
No, obviously not.
Okay.
The Brooklyn Nets don't seem interested in doing it. From what we can gather, it seems like the Nets want to be positioned to go pursue a star potentially in the offseason to add into this core. They can always choose to change their mind, but at least publicly, right? What we're hearing from the Nets is it's not even we'd have to be overwhelmed. We are not interested in trading Mikal Bridges at this time. You and I think both agree that's a mistake based on some packages that have been discussed, but it doesn't look like that's anything that they're going to consider ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, so two things about Bridges, and then we'll get into DFS and Royce and Spencer and all these other guys because there's plenty of guys to talk about. One thing I'll say about Bridges is I stand firm, and there's really only one package I would accept, and that's like Rockets, all the picks and swaps back. Short of that, I don't think there's other packages from other teams that were just going to be good for a while that I would accept. Sorry, go ahead. And I have one more point about that.
No. And I would say, I'd say I slightly differ from you in that you could tell me a team that offers a 4 first-round pick package and maybe a player, et cetera, for Mikal Bridges, where I would be at least more interested or intrigued by it than you would. When I talk with Matt George from Locked On Kings, the idea of a Kings team, that's not a franchise that has a track record of stable success. So I can think about some longer-term assets from specific teams that might interest me for him, though I'd be hard-pressed.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, and this is all like, look, it's all about what the deals available were, and sometimes you just don't know what those are going to be. The other thing I will say is, whether I was trading Bridges or not, this is exactly what I would also say as a front office. I would never admit it because obviously you're not like, yeah, we're shopping him, and then you don't do it, and then you have a guy that thinks you're going to get traded. So I don't think it like matters too much for me that they've made strong suggestions / statements that have said we're not going to scare, because I would say the same exact thing and then still feel okay trading him. That being said, I also don't think they're trading him. Right. So I think that like in the end, that's where it's going to be. And look, there's a strong case for keeping Mikal Bridges, a very strong case, right? He's on a ridiculously good contract. He can fit and pair with any guy that you end up maybe bringing in like at a superstar level. He'll fit with any scheme. So there's like lots of very good reasons to keep him. The only reason we had mentioned the Rockets piece was because it was a little more, holding your own destiny or controlling your own destiny, maybe realizing that this reboot was going to be a real big, like an uphill climb. And maybe now in a landscape of the NBA where many teams are just trying to be good, sometimes there is benefit to not being the best team for a couple years if
Right.
everyone else is trying, right? And so, but it doesn't look like that is going to end up being the case. As far as the rest of the trade deadline, I mean, we can probably go through some of these guys and where we think they're going to end up landing when it's all said and done.
Yeah, let's separate out one more guy here, I think, before we talk about some of the veterans. Nic Claxton, right? Because this also, so the reports are also now that the Nets are not interested in moving him, but unlike with Mikal Bridges, it's being speculated unless the package blew them away. Right now, define what a package looks like that blows the Brooklyn Nets away. That's a TBD. Liking him, as we say with all these players, loving him as a player and a talent and his skill set, 100%. But this is another one of those examples for me where if Brooklyn is uncertain about their intentions with him when it comes to the offseason, then you need to be open to what the packages could look like here. Is there a trade package for him if it's a first-round pick and other things? If it's not 2 first-round picks, is there a threshold where you say, I'll get to the offseason? Because my thinking has also been there's also a sign and trade ability here with Nic Claxton. If the Nets want to pursue a star, you can also start to create money matching ability with a player like him in the offseason as well.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be that incentivized to just like rush to send him out right here, unless you were, like they said, or was reported totally blown away with a package. I don't think you need to do that. I think he has value for you this year. I think there's a chance the market doesn't develop in like a massive way and you're able to get him on a decent contract. I think that that's a reasonable,
having him on your team.
Reasonable expectation. If you look at teams that maybe have the scratch to go out and spend for a center in the offseason, I'm not sure that list is super long. So I'm not sure, I think he'll command some money, but I don't know if it's going to be massive. So I think they might also look at this and say, we're going to get him back in a contract. He fits what we're doing. I think that there's that wouldn't bother me at all. And again, I don't think the market on him has been really robust either.
No.
I'm sure there's been calls, and I doubt that they've become anywhere close to getting blown away. And I think that's fine. I think he's not a guy that they have to be rushing to move on from.
He also represents, by the way, and then we'll move on in our next segment to some of the veterans. He also represents what I wish was more like baseball, where teams will often trade guys away as a rental for the remainder of the season and then bring them right back in free agency. You never get those opportunities in the NBA, but that's something that plays a factor for other teams as well. He's on an expiring contract, so there's no guarantee what you're buying beyond helping your team get better and more versatile defensively over the short term for a playoff run. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about the vets, Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal. Where's the market stand on them right now, and how low of a asking price should the Brooklyn Nets be willing to set? We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends over at Nissan. If you're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further, ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of top SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventures to the next level. You got the Nissan Pathfinder, the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room up to 8 expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capability, 284 horsepower, up to 6,000 pounds of towing. So you can put something on the back of that thing and make sure you're not going to be squeezing every last drop of engine out of it. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. They've also got the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's going to change what you expect from a full-size SUV. You can picture a rugged 4x4. It can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. You can tow bigger and explore further with the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com.
All right, so as we continue our trade deadline prep preview, we remind you to go over to WeGotNets.com, sign up for the free ebook, 5 stories in 5 days, all about the Brooklyn Nets, and keeping you alert for all the great content we have going on over there moving forward. WeGotNets.com, sign up today for your free ebook. When it comes to now the veterans, Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, I'm just going to put this as a blanket. Every outlet is discussing and reporting on Dorian Finney-Smith specifically. Yeah. But one of the differences here, a year ago, 2 first-round value put on him. Now that doesn't seem like it's the case. Brooklyn's still being speculated as they want a first and an equivalent of a first-round talent to move him. That doesn't look likely. He has the multiple years here, still next year, and then the player option. So the Nets also are afforded flexibility here in terms of time. I think age is not on their side when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith, and they should be in the mode of trying to move him here. Again, if you're the Brooklyn Nets, let's do first off, do you think he gets moved by the deadline here? Just individually before we talk from the Nets perspective.
I'm going to say no. And I I'm going to caveat that with, I wonder if they have like sort of misjudged this market again, but I'm going to say no. And like with Claxton, I can make a case for that being okay, though we're starting to get into an iffier zone, right? Like with the Bridges piece, the Claxton one, I'm like, okay, it's there's more side of keeping them that I'm just fine with, right? I think the coin lands on that side many more times. But with DFS and then some of these other guys, it's getting a little bit closer. He's a lot older, right? Like he's 30 years old. That's just not young. And even if it's not, okay, so I'm going long, but yes, I want to say no. I'm going to say no. What do you think? I think he does not get moved, and I wonder if we're feeling frustrated by it.
I don't think he gets moved. There's also been reports that like Dallas was never really that as into as was first speculated about him coming back to Dallas and what they'd be willing to offer there. We had discussions with Nick Angstadt from the Locked On Mavs podcast as well. Now there's some rumblings that maybe a team like Milwaukee would be into it, but again, asking price, right? And so from a Nets perspective, as you said in the first segment about Mikal Bridges, well, we're going to put a very high threshold because we ultimately don't want to move on from this player. We want to keep him around. And if we want to go down the Nets front office model of, well, we think maybe in the offseason we could go pursue a superstar, okay, then having a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith might make a little bit of sense. If that doesn't pan out, while the value will then be even further diminished, it looks like the market is telling you the value has already fallen out here, right? If you were going to move Dorian Finney-Smith, the time was last year when you made the trade with Dallas, you send him out immediately for a couple of first-round picks, and you just live with that result on the back end in terms of need to fill out your roster and what it looks like going forward.
Well, see, this is where I wonder if like Marks and company are just anchored in the wrong place, because like this is sometimes can affect your decision making too. If your anchor is at 2 first-round picks and that market has just changed, then you're going to feel like, no, we can't do it because it's not the deal we want. But like that deal might just not ever be walking through the door again. Now, you might say to yourself, look, he's 30 years old. He makes like really very little money. I mean, 14 this year, 15 next year, player option for 15. I don't think it's like a total. I think there's a world where he picks that up too, right? He's shooting 38% from 3. He's very versatile for your team. He can play sort of like backup 5 minutes. He can defend a lot of his positions. Like the other guys, he has use this year and maybe going forward if you bring in, these other guys that have been mentioned, like Donovan Mitchell, whatever. Like he can fit into a lot of different schemes. I wouldn't be crushed, but it just also, if they didn't ship him. But I do sometimes wonder about like these two first round pick deals where they just insist that this is what he's worth. And like, I don't know, really very few players are drawing that these days, like especially just role players. He's good. It's all compliments. He's a good player. I'm really glad he's on the team. But like this trade market, I do think a theme of this trade market is there's a few of these like sort of like super role players that teams value very highly. They kind of want to be blown away. But when you're the other team, you're like, I'm going to give 2 first-round picks, even late ones for Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I don't know. That doesn't feel good. So, like, this is what I think is happening with, like, Alex Caruso and some other guys. Rightfully so. Like, the Bulls should keep these guys, keep him. But I do think there's a gap with, like, just this kind of guy. Role player, not a star, 4th, 5th best player on your team. I think it's hard to think about giving up multiple first-round picks for a guy like it. Might be hard to think about giving 1 first-round pick up for a guy like this.
Yeah, and this is where, you mentioned, we talk about this before, of what is a first-round pick value, right? There's the lottery pick, and then there's the everything else kind of first-round pick. And so other teams should think about that differently, right? We say 2 first-round picks. We should associate that the way that it's being intended. Deep playoff team, going to be a 25 to 30 pick in the first round for a couple of years. That's fine. But the Nets should also be flexible in, hey, did you make a late first round pick on a guy that maybe is underwhelmed a little bit and is under 23 years old? You can put him in the mix and that helps us. Or
they should also be willing to take back less than what has been offered before or whatever too.
Like, you market might have just changed the table and say it was 2 first round picks a year ago, so we have to get the equivalent. No, you don't. It doesn't. It's not as valuable today, and that's your own mistake. And this is the old throwing good money after bad, essentially, of saying, well, we can't possibly now. Okay, keep walking down the path of this player's value diminishing until, as you said, he probably will pick up that player option. Why? Because you can name a dozen veteran role players in his kind of mold that leave whatever team, get out of a contract, and they end up signing veteran minimums. The Nets have a guy in Lonnie Walker right now on their team that has a serviceable role that does not make a lot of money. So all of a sudden it becomes a little bit of a devil's bargain in terms of how far you want to move down this road. And you can make the case the Nets have already passed the point of no return on actually getting what they perceive to be value on him.
But it's also an easy story to tell themselves because of the things I mentioned before. He's versatile. Everyone loves him too. Like he's a great guy. Everyone, he's a good player. Everyone loves him. He fits a lot of different things your team doesn't have, especially with Sharp out. Like you can do a lot. If you're a team that's still kind of trying to win, it's good to have him around, right? So like this is like sort of the problem I think at times with the Nets way of thinking is that they're, because they're still kind of trying to win, right? And then like that could stop them from making maybe good sort of like basketball decisions around some of these guys that are like 30 years old that aren't maybe going to be on the team in 2 years. And for a team that has very little, the team that could use every draft pick it could get, right? Like they could use every draft pick here and just taking, not capitalizing opportunities, even if they're worse than they were before. I don't know. This is another close call for me. I do not think he gets traded though. I think he's going to be on the team following 3:00 or whatever the trade deadline is.
Yeah, following 4:00 trade.
4:00, sorry.
Which it's okay. We'll decide how we feel about it by 3:00. We'll make our firm decisions. No, I agree with you too. Again, contract control, all of that good stuff. The other then veteran that we look at here is Royce O'Neal, and this is where there's a little bit of a trickle down effect. There's one other player. So I'm actually going to go quickly to Lonnie Walker. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about Royce O'Neal and talk about some of the youth on this team, specifically coming out of that last game in Jaylen Wilson. Lonnie Walker is garnering in some interest too now. And this is a great example of 1-year contract. Do you plan on bringing him back? If not, again, there's almost nothing that's too low to take on a player if you don't intend to retain him in the long term. This is again, short-sightedness maybe of the Brooklyn Nets organization on this player.
What you mean, like in terms of like not trading Walker? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you have him right now and you don't think you're going to re-sign him in the offseason, then getting anything for him is better than nothing later. And all these trade exceptions that we talk about that all get listed out here, guess what? Multiple ones just expired on the 6th for the Brooklyn Nets. They don't get used. So these things don't matter.
Well, that was always the biggest joke. Those things were never getting used. Those trade exceptions. Like I could have, we talked yesterday about how much money I would have bet on like the Royce O'Neal thing. It would have been a close number on me betting on the Nets not using their trade exceptions. Like that was just so obvious. Anyway, with Walker, he's funny. Like $2 million clearly has outplayed it. He's had some. That seemed to maybe they're the only team seemed to sort of run bad with these guys getting injured right at the trade deadline. Like last year, Harris was hurt at the trade deadline. Curry was hurt at the trade deadline. Lonnie Walker's hurt. DFS is hurt. Like everyone's kind of hurt around the time you might want to trade them. Nothing too bad. Maybe that stops teams from looking at it. It's also one of these things like with Lonnie. Again, a lot of these teams that are trading for playoff guys. Teams that are trading might be in the playoff hunt. You sometimes want to imagine sort of like where a guy will fit in your playoff scheme. And he's really good, but he's not exactly probably going to be on the court for like long stretches in the playoffs, you wouldn't think. And so the price
for a buried asset on your bench.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel bad because I know sometimes I'm like, I'm not, he's been awesome. It's not that. It's just that it's harder to find the fit. I don't see him moving though.
Neither do I, but I would say briefly here, if you could get one, maybe a couple second-round picks, something like that, whatever it may look like, fringe playoff teams actually, I think would be better suited to pursue a guy like Walker than deep playoff guys. To your point, the bench gets shorter. But if I'm an edge team, I'm in the play-in tournament. Hey, guess what? Lonnie Walker could move the needle a little bit for you.
Like the Milwaukee. I can see like Milwaukee needing a guy like him, right? Like sort of like behind Dame, not a point guard, but gives you some scoring, can score at 3 levels, like. I think he would fit there as just a little respite and make sure you had like a scorer off the bench, which they don't really have. Like I could see, I'm just throwing a team out there. I don't think they're going to trade for it, but like, yes, I like not going to play a ton in the playoffs, but could really help you for the rest of the regular season.
Of course. So coming up here in a second, let's take a look at Royce O'Neal expiring contract, how he's standing in the way of Jaylen Wilson from fully blooming into a rotational player for the Brooklyn Nets, and whether or not we ultimately think we'll find ourselves disappointed when the trade deadline finally ends. We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. It's demon time on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. Like I said, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct payouts. These are all over the site too, these demons and goblins. It's really cool too, because you're going to go over to Prize Picks. Prize Picks took the very coolest ways to play daily fantasy. You're just going to go more or less on the Prize Picks projections, and then they throw in these demons and goblins too. So if you go over what's happening here on Sunday, you got look at guys like Brock Purdy. You might have a demon there for more than 299.5 passing yards. That's a ton, but guess what? That pays out a lot more. You get the goblin going at 199.5. Not going to pay out the same exact number on that one, but it's a little easier number to stomach when you're watching the big game. And just get the 200 more or less there on the Brock Purdy number. I can sink my teeth into something like that. Prize Picks is so simple to play. You put together 4 to 5 different plays, go more or less on the Prize Picks projections. You can even combine sports, put together NFL, NBA plays all in one. They just took all the most fun ways to do this stuff. Put it on one platform. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we wrap up our trade deadline preview for the Brooklyn Nets, let's quickly, because Royce O'Neal, we talked about him before, expiring contract, playing really well, hitting some nice late game threes for the Brooklyn Nets. Might actually be critical for them actually being in some of these games. And ironically, he is healthy. He is playing. I love Royce. Basically, all the guys we talk about the Nets may be trading, I love them as players. I think they're great players. They contribute. It's wonderful. He is a guy that I think should be traded. I think will be traded. Yeah. And there's this one-to-one correlation. Talked about him earlier in the season. Played against the Mavericks, looked good. Jaylen Wilson is ready for a role to me at the NBA level. And if he isn't, then you don't draft a 22-year-old player as the Brooklyn Nets did. You have to clear out a veteran at some point to open up minutes for a kid like this.
Yeah, I had to trade him. If it's a second round pick, it's a second round pick. What are we doing here? They just have young guys that are coming up behind him. He's 30. They got him on a good contract. He's outplayed the contract right now. He's been a really important guy for this team over the last couple of years. He's done everything you ask him for him. It's time to just it was a bit of a head scratcher when they traded a first for him before. You cannot be anchored, like I said before, in that first, because that, even at the time, I remember our reaction was like, oh, that's pretty steep. First round pick for Royce O'Neal.
Looks steep for once they traded all the stars away.
Right. Looks way worse. But again, he's played really well. It feels like he's played as good as you can possibly. I mean, thank God he's making these threes. Yep. So like other teams can kind of look at that and say, yeah, like this is something that will work for us. Has to be out the door. Like he's one. I can make the excuses for the other guys about why it might make sense to stick around, mostly because either they're young and you're signing to a new contract, or they're just already under contract for a while.
Yep.
He's just expiring. Like they go find someone that can give you a second for him or something like that. And if you can get more, go for it. This would be if he was still on the team, either there was just zero market, or, which feels a little hard to believe because he makes no money either, like $9 million, or they just have the wrong goals here. Right. Yep. And this is like a la sort of what happened last year. Now they were able to get off the Mills stuff and the Harris stuff this year and unload those contracts. But this is just a different thing. This is the Seth Curry thing. It's like you're just going to lose them for nothing. And he actually, unlike Curry, I think that he probably can fetch you at least something here.
Yeah, and some of those things, getting off of Mills and getting off of Harris, like it wasn't just a freebie. You had to manipulate money and attach things, to make those happen, to get off the money off your books. In Royce O'Neal's case, I'll put out like these couple of scenarios very quickly. I mentioned this, I think, to you off podcast. You go and you look at a team like the Detroit Pistons, who say they want a little more floor spacing shooters on the outside to help the young team. They have a second round pick from Memphis or Washington. Those are two teams that are probably going to be towards the bottom. So you can look at that as being, that's almost a back end first round pick. Make that type of move. I'll also point out, even though you think it's unlikely you would do any type of trades with the New York Knicks, if I hear Quentin Grimes dealing with a knee injury right now, but they talked about wanting to move on to him because of where his contract is. You and I were a massive fan of him coming out of the draft. I would do a 1-to-1 player swap to bring in a young player that you think has upside for you. Like, I think that's where the Nets
Who is the player? I just missed the name.
Quentin Grimes for the Knicks.
Oh, Quentin Grimes. Gotcha.
Because they're ready to move off of him because they're not going to bring him back. They're not going to, new contract, all that stuff with him. So, okay, great. Young player, upside, great. Give me one of those players. It doesn't have to just be multiple second round picks the proven commodities at the NBA level in terms of having a sample size on guys is just as important as another dart throw in the second round. That being the case, I really don't have anybody else. Dennis Smith Jr. is not going anywhere. Again,
Dinwiddie.
Dinwiddie, right, would be the other guy. I assume he's not going anywhere because who's giving you anything for him unless it's a part of one of those 3-team deals where the Nets end up with something.
Man, the Dinwiddie situation is so weird. It is. I actually don't know because I don't think he's going to get traded. I think he really wants to be traded, right? And I wonder if
he sees himself as still being someone that should be able to contribute and be in a better role for himself somewhere else too.
There's been rumblings for a while now that the Nets might have even, I don't even want to report this, but there's been rumblings that he might have thought
something was going to happen, and
he thought maybe something was going to happen. I don't think that's been widely reported. The energy level has been weird. If you look at, there's some random videos that have come out here too about his during the Mavericks game, he just sat at the scorer's table while Jacques Vaughn was talking to the rest of the team. Looked totally disengaged, but they still play him a lot of minutes. So this is why it's a really confusing thing. It's because he seems disengaged at times, but then the Nets are also oh yeah, but you can also, play 35 minutes and sometimes guard the other team's best player. So it's okay, well, that really wouldn't track with a guy who the team just wanted to be rid of. So I can't really tell what is true or what's made up here around Dinwiddie, or what is just personality and what's disinterested or disgruntled or whatever. I don't see much of a market for him. He's done himself, and the Nets have done them no favors here with just his overall play over the last couple of weeks. Right. I think it's a lot harder to probably look at him and try to imagine him coming in and making a big difference for a team, because he's really not been a difference maker at all for the Nets, especially in the offensive end, where it's been long stretches of just forgetting he's on the court. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's going to be a market for him. But I also wonder if I actually wonder if he'd be a buyout candidate or something. And I think that will be be maybe not. And this is maybe where the conjectures have gone too far, but there's just been so many things sort of brought up either off the cuff or straight out said by reporters or whatever. I find this situation to be very confusing, because the one hand I can make a strong case that he looks totally out of it, doesn't want to be on the team, looks pissed off. But then the way the team uses him at times wouldn't suggest that at all. So I'm kind of lost here. But I could really literally see anything from on the team, traded, or even bought out, though I think the bought out thing is very unlikely.
Yeah, I find the buyout component interesting. And to your point, it's also maybe because he's getting a little bit older and he's the oldest player on the team and he's lost a little bit of a step and he's lost some of his up, right? And maybe there's a frustration just about, I thought I was going to be able to be a certain guy for this team and I'm not. And with the return of Ben Simmons, even though you have concerns about his health, it changes the hierarchy of this thing, right? Cam Thomas has a bigger role now, Dennis Smith Jr. So all of a sudden, you can envision this version of the team where Spencer Dinwiddie should be getting pushed out of his role, but the Nets always struggle with these types of decisions when it comes to the rotation. In the end, we'll be back in, obviously, live for the coverage on Thursday as the deadline approaches. But we land on, we think, Royce O'Neal, right? We both agree Royce O'Neal is probably the likeliest to be traded, and I think will be traded ultimately. Everybody else, I think Nets fans should be prepared for disappointment, because I don't think that you're going to see big moves like you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I think it's going to be Mikal, Clax, DFS on the team, Royce traded, and Dinwiddie, I'm willing to just put a huge question mark. That could be related to other deals too. One other thing before we get out of here, and then we'll take a few things in YouTube. I know people stuck around here forever. I will say, facilitating a 3-team deal, that could be something they're waiting on also. And so go ahead.
That was going to be my caveat, was just Dorian Finney-Smith, does a team get desperate, or Spencer Dinwiddie 3-team deals. We've heard the Murray rumors and the Lakers and everything else, right? They're maybe it is, as you say, they're posturing on the value they want for guys, just to wait to see as these needs start to unfold for other teams. Okay, we'll help you out getting the guy you want. It's just going to take some extra draft capital to make it happen, right? That would be the shrewd move by Sean Marks, and we've seen him do this over the years. So if you want to be optimistic, it's that the Nets are just positioning themselves to be the key pivot team for several squads that want to really improve for playoff runs.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone here that jumped into YouTube.
Oh,
We'll hang around a few minutes here in YouTube live. Go throw in a Locked On Nets. We'll bring up some questions, answer them here as we go late into the night on Tuesday. Make sure you go to wegotnets.com to grab that free ebook.
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That's Emily Dickinson.
Oh, my goodness. One of the all-time great literal poets. We'll be back again tomorrow in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah. All right, everybody. Straight into a little bonus conversation for you. As Doug said, we appreciate everyone sticking around. We wanted to make sure that we gave where we kind of stood, a preview of the trade deadline, so we have it up and out ahead of the deadline. But that meant not ignoring you guys, but needing to just tamper down the discussion. So shout out, obviously, at Locked On Nets. If you have a question, a comment, we'll dive in on them. I'm sure they're probably deadline-related stuff. I already saw some things about firing Jacques Vaughn. Maybe they trade Jacques Vaughn. Sean Remy coming in with, except for the Nets, every other team has allowed its rookies to flourish. JV is not performing too well when it comes to young players. Well, I looked this up before. The Nets are nowhere near this category in terms of minutes for the rookies. You don't need to really even, get too into the numbers on it. But this isn't necessarily just a Jacques Vaughn thing.
No, that's what I was going to say.
This is an organizational decision. We can go back and debate, should they have drafted Noah Clowney? Should they have drafted Whitehead, regardless of the injury? 2 19-year-olds, that's great. But we can look around a whole bunch of guys that got picked in and around the 20th and 21st picks of this past draft that are playing. You don't have to look too far over to Golden State and see that they have Podsvensky, I always mess up his name, playing real minutes and developing. And they're a team that's basically in the same kind of waters as the Nets right now, right? Under 500, not a real optimistic outlook for the rest of the season. And they're finding ways to make sure they develop those guys. But that's organizational, not just Jacques Vaughn.
Yeah, Pajemski there. You got it, buddy. The one difference with the Nets, okay, so one thing is Jacques Vaughn can't facilitate two-way deals that goes and grabs the guys from Long Island and back, right? So
call them up.
That's an organizational thing. And though these guys have been in Long Island for the most time, that part is not on Jacques Vaughn, right? Like he's not the one facilitating transactions back and forth between Long Island. The other thing too, and I don't really want to give Vaughn any credit here, but the Nets are different. Okay, they're different than the Warriors because the Warriors are super top heavy, right? It's like Curry, Clay, Draymond, Wiggins, Kuminga, and then like nothing, right? Like Lester Quinones is playing the other night. The Nets don't have tons of top tier talent, but for a lot of the season they've had plenty of middle talent, right? Like Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, right? Like Royce O'Neal. Now Ben Simmons is coming back in the fold. Like they've had Lonnie Walker, Dennis Smith Jr. They have lots of guys who are NBA ready guys. And that is a little bit harder to fit the young guys in with because these other guys are going to want to play minutes too. Right. Yeah. So I think that's like the one difference with some of these other teams is the Nets are deeper than these other teams. They're not as good, but they have more NBA kind of caliber dudes. Yeah. So I think that's my answer for that one. I'm starting a couple more.
For me, for Nets for me, the only tweaks I'd make is a point guard. Dinwiddie moved, Giles and Royce moved, but I'd keep DFS. Keeping DFS, I think, again, that's why Doug and I talk about it. Like I can understand the path there. Mentioning Giles as a guy to move, I mean, cut him. I mean, that's moving Giles. No one's knocking down your door.
I don't even know why he's on the team.
I'm
glad he's getting paid. I would never I'm super glad he's getting paid $2 million. Like that's great.
Yeah.
But it's very confusing why he's even on the team at this point. Like they literally never play him in any situation. So
of course. Absolutely shocking. Jonathan, frequent flyer with us. Mavs are out on Doe, but the Bucks have shown increased interest. If they could get a first-round draft pick, does Bobby Portis, Beauchamp, a first-round draft pick for Doe work for BK?
I don't think the Bucks have a first-round draft pick to trade. Do they?
I don't know what they have in their coffers, and a part of it was, if I remember correctly, it may have been Royce O'Neal that they talked about as well for the Bucks. And looking at it,
I'm pretty sure after the holiday trade and now
Portis was
between the holiday trade and the Dame trade, I don't think they have any more first to trade.
I'm gonna pull that up in the background as we have our discussion.
So anyway, I'll go back to that question from before too. It's about the point guard. The Nets really could use a point guard, but I think the hope here is that Simmons can facilitate some of the things that Cam and Mikal Bridges do well, and that if he can increase his minutes, like he would kind of cure some of that not traditional point guard. But they don't want to run pick and roll anyway with the guys they have. So, like they have actually a pretty good pick and roll point guard in Spencer Dinwiddie, but they don't want to do that anymore. So at that point, you don't need a pick and roll point guard. At that point, just play Simmons. I think that Simmons is probably the guy they want to have here. And I can't really see like who I would trade for from a point guard perspective on this year's market personally.
The Bucks have 2024 first round pick with Pelicans holding the rights to swap. No 25 though, so the consecutive first round pick would come into play there. They have 26, they have 30, so they have so distanced first round picks. 2024 second rounder, 2027 second rounder, maybe a player.
Yeah, but I don't think they can trade those because of the Stepien rule, right? Because it'd be because of the 24 and 26.
Yeah, second round picks they could trade. The first round picks.
Oh, second round picks.
At that point, yeah, 2024, 26, and 30. You can't. You don't have the alternating first round draft picks.
Yeah.
So at that point, you'd be saying that's why Royce O'Neal maybe would make sense for them if they were interested. Hey, give me the 2 second round picks. That's enough for us on an expiring deal. At that point, for Dorian Finney-Smith, you'd be talking about really giving him away, even if we think that they're setting too high of a price tag for him. Eric came in with this one. Do you think they trade Cam Johnson? No
Chance.
Yeah,
he's another one that's hurt. So even if they wanted to,
another guy who can't play.
They would never trade him. Like they're just locked in on these guys. Like they locked in on what they did in the offseason, and that's just who they want to be on the team. Whatever. It is what it is.
How much do you think, if we pull anything else up, and then we'll obviously won't spend too much time here being with us on Thursday for the deadline. How much do you think that organizationally they are still willing to drink the short-term Kool-Aid because they're locked into him anyway? But of like Ben Simmons, like you get these sample sizes, you see how good the offense can look. Do you think that the Nets, really look at that and say, even just for the rest of this year and next year, that, hey, like Ben Simmons is the viable option? I know you can't get rid of this contract, but I just wonder, truth serum, if they're still willing to think that he can be a productive member on this team. Because to me, it's only, well, you're playing out the string. Even if he flashes brilliance, we understand the risks and the shortcomings of his game as well. I wonder if the Nets look at it as, why would we trade all these guys? Like Ben Simmons, as he gets back in health and gets his feet underneath him, that starts to become a real dangerous team if we go add one player to the mix next year.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, how could they? How could you possibly think that way? I mean, they're probably just forced into thinking this way too. I think, I don't know. It's really hard to know what their thought process around these things are, because I don't see how you could in any world have any confidence in Simmons' long-term health. Like, it's just,
of course,
that cat seems so far out of the bag that that's just me. Maybe people see it differently because they have the medicals and they believe it differently. I don't know. Like I personally can't get there, but maybe someone else could be talked into. I just think that, one, I think that they feel very strongly they're going to be able to pry loose another superstar like a Donovan Mitchell or something like that to pair with these guys and to be much better. And I think they're just totally locked in on that right now. And I think they just can't stomach. They don't want to stomach a rebuild. They have no interest in doing it. And like, that's just the path they're going to take.
It's so weird to be in a rebuild while,
well, they're not going to call it a rebuild. They're going to call it like a reboot,
right? Like we can't stomach a rebuild, so we just won't acknowledge that like we are effectively in a rebuild, right? Like it's an odd approach.
I get it. Look, you got to sell tickets. You can't raise prices every year if you're just going to bottom out. And and maybe there's definite financial considerations here. These guys aren't making widgets. Like, this is a business, so there's other considerations that you and I do not have to worry about, right? And we're going to do the podcast no matter what. Now, and I'll say too, I've said this many times, it's way worse for us if the Nets are bad, right? Like, we're one of the very few people in the population here that see, other than players in the team and people that work for the team, that definitely see a financial impact if the team is not good. If the team is good, like, we make more money on the podcast. Like, and I'm still willing to advocate for the other way, but I just don't think the Nets are. They're not. They just don't. There's no signal at all that they want to do that.
Here's my last thought of the night. That's it. The Nets are done before the deadline. They'll play on the deadline night, February 8th on Thursday against Cleveland. They play Cleveland and San Antonio at home. Then they have a home and home against Boston, Toronto, Minnesota, Memphis, Orlando. So there's some winnable games, and then a double up against the Atlanta Hawks. But if you come out, you're 20-30 right now. Like, let's also be clear here, right? You are 20-30 through 50 games. If you come out and lose 4 out of those first 5 games, which is not an unrealistic thing to have happen outside of the San Antonio matchup, it is going to look just god awful if you have not moved veteran contracts. If if you haven't moved the needle on things, and in the blink of an eye, you're 21-34, and you know what I mean. It's going to be. You think it's bad to, have to sell the rebuild and everything else. It's even worse when you say you're not rebuilding and your team is 15 games under 500, right? Like it gets worse and worse if you continue to go down a path of keeping all these players and all these contracts, and the results are in front of you saying, yeah, but you're not a good team. Like, okay, but just you wait. Let us sell you on a dream. Donovan Mitchell, even if they go to the Eastern Conference Finals, he's still going to leave that team and want to sign with us. Like it just doesn't happen that way.
And it's so funny too, because if you compare it to the last time they did this, right? The last time they were in this situation where the team wasn't that good, or they didn't have a lot of draft picks, right? And they were but they had a path to open up a lot of cap space, and they had a team that was way overachieving. And see, that's the difference, right? Like if you think back to the D'Lo, right? Those D'Lo days, Jared Allen, like when they're making the playoffs, and Jared Dudley's looks like he's going to fight Ben Simmons, and it's like, that playoff series, that team was crazy overachieving, right? They were crazy overachieving. And I think at that point, KD and Kyrie were already coming, so I don't think they had to, but the vibe was totally different. It was like, hey, we built this thing. We brought it back from the ashes, and we worked our way into like this really competitive, scrappy team that's like really playing way better than anyone thought.
Of course.
That's just not the vibe here. The vibe here is just not that. It's like, we're not going to have tons of cap space. They'll have some cap space. Free agents don't come like this anymore. You're going to have to trade all your stuff to get these guys now, pretty much. Right. And so I think people that want to compare this situation to the last time, it's just, it's not a comp. It's not the same. Like they got bailed out for these last two free agents and Kawhi. These are the last three guys that basically want to do this. And LeBron. It's like this old guard that tested free agency late in the game, and they moved teams. Right. A lot of these guys signed their rookie extensions now, and they signed their extensions. Like they're just locked up. Like this free agency is not a facilitator to get these guys. It's just people that want to look back at the last time. This is not it. They're gonna have to pay a lot to get these guys, another group of guys in the door. And the vibe around the team is just so different.
Right. This is actually
are the 20 and 30 Nets one guy? Are the 20 and 30 Nets one guy away from being good? I mean, maybe they are. I don't know. But it just seems a little bit like they've sold themselves something that might not be true.
I'll actually use this last one from Ian here. Why would Donovan want to come here instead of the Knicks? I'll just use that as the example. It's not even the Knicks. It's any team that has draft capital. And the Knicks do have a lot of draft capital. If the world comes to pass when Donovan Mitchell says, I am moving on and I am going to be traded, there's going to be other teams. It's not just going to be Brooklyn saying, well, here's our very select collection of picks that we'll give you. I said this before too. Sure. Donovan Mitchell, we'll take Mikal Bridges. We'll take Cam Thomas. We'll take some players in this process too. And then if you start to get into a bidding war over one available star, tell me where you are down the road. I know we've done this discussion before, but it's...
Well, by the way, too, like, I think we're kind of gone with I'm demanding to go to this team trade too. Like Dame tried it. A lot of
people said that. Oh, he'll dictate where he goes. He will? He'll dictate that?
Is Dame in Miami?
Jazz will dictate where they get the best haul.
I don't remember Damian Lillard being like, hey, send me to Milwaukee. But guess what? Like he got sent to Milwaukee. Right. And so I just think that I think the NBA has kind of said, like, we're kind of done with that. And
resetting the narrative on
good for Portland for standing their ground. Portland said, nope. It looked the one way after KD said he wanted to go to Phoenix, but I just think that like that part where it's like, that's where he's going to say he wants to get traded. I think they're just going to say, get bent. Like if you're under contract, like, what does it make? It doesn't help us. Like, I don't think anyone, because guess what? And look at the narrative too. No one is giving Portland a hard time. Maybe, and do you think players are going to care? No, they don't care. Like, no one's going to care if no one's going to look and be like, oh, they did right by that guy. We're going to sign with the team. It's not how it works. And so I don't know. I just would be worried if you're banking on this one Donovan Mitchell situation. I just think there's lots of paths where it doesn't happen.
Yeah, 100%. So it's going to be interesting to see, obviously, the deadline coming through here. I'd like to be pleasantly surprised and see the Nets, again, we talked about this a lot, reconfigure this roster a little bit so that the pieces complement each other more, but it just doesn't seem likely. So Thursday, deadline, around 3 o'clock, we'll be live. We'll have it posted up ahead of time. So follow us over on Twitter at Doug Norrie, Adam Armbrecht, Locked On Nets, just so you're alert and aware when we're doing it. We'll run it up right to the deadline. news happens, great. We'll also talk about, by the way, on deadline day, if deals get made, whether or not the Brooklyn Nets should have been involved in those type of discussions if they end up standing pat with a lot of their players. Until next time, though, I like to take these over for some weird reason. I don't know why. You follow us everywhere on YouTube, subscribe, give the 5-star review, and we'll be back again next time. I did it, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.